My name is Christian, I'm 33 years old, and today I'm going to tell you about the first time I had sex with my father-in-law. First of all, I'm going to tell you a little about myself so you can understand the story better, so leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I work as a marketing consultant for a company that serves large clients in Portland, Oregon. The city is the kind of place where you see the rhythm of life changing according to the seasons. In winter, the streets are quieter, covered in a layer of fog that seems to keep everyone inside their homes. In summer, the city explodes in color and sound, with people walking through the squares and the smell of fresh coffee spreading from the cafes. But none of that mattered to me. My life was in an automatic rhythm, a routine that I had already lost control of. Amelia and I met at college, in an almost chance encounter. She was 2 years older than me, a determined and brilliant law student. I was the marketing boy, full of dreams and projects for the future. And she, with her clear eyes and direct way of speaking, seemed to be the woman I'd always wanted by my side. When she looked at me for the first time, I felt like my life had taken on a whole new perspective. She was the kind of person you knew you weren't going to let go of easily. We got married shortly after graduation, a simple ceremony but full of meaning. Amelia had always been the practical, straightforward type, not given to exaggeration. We had a balanced marriage. It seemed to be enough. I didn't miss anything, at least not until recently. Something had changed between us, but I didn't know exactly what. What had seemed like the life of my dreams was beginning to look empty, like a painting that, after looking at it for too long, begins to lose its colors. It was a Tuesday when I realized that something was different, perhaps for the first time. Amelia was at home, but she seemed to be somewhere else, not physically, of course. She was there, in the living room, sitting on the sofa with her laptop on her lap, drafting yet another of those long contracts that were her daily job as a lawyer. But her eyes were lost somewhere far away, as if her mind was far away. There was something lonely about her posture, her back bent as she typed, her hair falling sloppily over her shoulders. She no longer looked like the woman I married. She no longer cared about anything. I didn't know how to approach her, so as much as I missed her presence, I just walked away in silence, trying to find myself in something. Deep down, I had always known that my work took up a lot of my time, but when it was her turn to be emotionally absent, I began to feel a deep unease, as if I were missing out on something I didn't even know I had. It was against this backdrop that Brendan came into his own, Amelia's father. For those familiar with the concept of father-in-law, Brendan has always been the kind of person who could easily be classified as someone you talk to little, but respect a lot. He is 58 years old, a man with gray hair and a calm but imposing manner. There was never any reason for us to get closer than necessary, but there was also no discomfort or animosity between us. He was a pleasant figure, who talked about things from his time with that distant look of someone who has seen a lot. He was retired, lived in a large house in the suburbs, and his visits to our house were always occasional, as good family gatherings should be. That weekend, as he always did, he showed up unannounced. Not that this was unusual, but I was feeling the distance from Amelia, and to be honest, I was starting to feel disconnected from everything. The feeling of emptiness was eating me up inside, and even the smell of coffee on Saturday morning seemed to be heavier, more bitter. When Brendan arrived, I was slumped on the sofa with a cup of coffee in my hand and my eyes fixed on the TV screen, not really watching anything. "Hey, Christian," he said in that deep tone that gave the impression that he was always reflecting on something much deeper than anyone else around him. "You don't pay much attention to me, do you? Shall we go for a walk? Talk things over a bit?" I didn't have much to do at the moment, and the idea of going out for a breath of fresh air sounded good. "Sure, let's go," I replied without much enthusiasm. Amelia was in the kitchen, already bogged down with yet another pile of work, and didn't even notice when we left. Portland has that particular charm of a big city, but with the feeling that everything is always slowing down. The streets in the center are always full of people, but soon you enter quieter neighborhoods, where trees dominate the scenery and the houses have a unique style, with perfectly tended gardens. The walk was good, the weather was mild, and the seemingly banal conversation started to get deeper than I expected. Brendan started talking about time, about how life seemed to have a rhythm of its own, and how he never understood the fact that people got lost in their routines without even realizing it. I just listened, not really knowing what to say, but he seemed to be watching me with a different kind of attention, as if he was waiting for something from me, something I didn't know what it was. Then he said to me, almost as if it were a confession, "I know you're going through something, Christian. You can't fool me." I stared at him, confused, but I didn't say anything. How did he know? Maybe it was the way I'd been behaving recently, or maybe he was simply more perceptive than I thought. But what he said next was what struck me. "You're at a turning point, and you need to decide what you really want from your life." Brendan put his hand on my shoulder, something that seemed like an attempt at consolation, but at that moment, it didn't sound like a simple expression of friendship. He said these words with a calmness that made me feel uncomfortable, as if he was warning me about something I didn't want to hear. I tried to change the subject, to talk about anything, but the moment was so charged that I felt it was impossible to escape. "You don't realize it, but you're losing yourself," he said while staring into my eyes. "It's like a river that runs its course, but you never ask yourself where it's going." In that instant, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Somehow, Brendan was becoming someone I talked to about more than just everyday life. He made me question my own choices, my own paths, and without meaning to, he had touched something deep inside me. The days that followed that conversation with Brendan seemed like a sequence of moments in which time dragged on and, at the same time, sped up without my being able to control it. Something in me had changed, but I still didn't know how to identify what it was. His words about deciding what I really want echoed in my mind, as if they had been said to provoke something in me, a deep reflection that I didn't want to do. And yet, everything was pushing me towards this invisible abyss. It was on that Friday night that things began to take an unexpected turn. Amelia was tired. She had just returned from an important meeting at the office and was completely absorbed in her thoughts, preparing yet another of her solitary dinners. She was always so busy, and I couldn't blame her for that. But something in me, which used to be satisfied with small talk around the table, now felt completely disconnected. She looked at me and smiled, unaware that somewhere I was no longer there. While she finished dinner in the kitchen, I began to get lost in my own thoughts. The atmosphere in the house was heavier than ever. The soft light from the kitchen lamp illuminated Amelia's face, but to me it seemed distant, as if we were in different worlds. Maybe it was the routine. Maybe it was the fact that I missed something, a more visceral, raw connection. And it was in that moment of disconnection, when the distance between us seemed unbearable, that Brendan called me. "Christian, can I meet you? I need to talk to you about a few things," he said in his usual calm and direct voice. I didn't hesitate. At that moment, the idea of leaving the four walls of the house seemed like a relief. I needed something new, anything to break up the monotony. We met at a cafe near the Willamette riverfront, a place that always seemed deserted at night, as if the rest of the city had forgotten about that piece of land. The street lamps reflected off the water, and the atmosphere was shrouded in a light mist. When Brendan arrived, he had that calm look on his face, but there was something different about his demeanor, a tension that I couldn't immediately identify. "I was thinking about what we talked about last time," he said, as he sat down opposite me, his eyes fixed on mine. "You seem to be distancing yourself from something important." I nodded, not because I had an answer ready, but because his words seemed to have the power to paralyze me. He continued, almost as if he was preparing to say something that he knew could mess with my mind. "I know you've been lonely," he said. "I know that your life with Amelia has been good, but you feel like you're missing out on something. You feel that, don't you?" I didn't know what to say. He was right, but his words were hitting a nerve, as if he was laying bare something I didn't want to admit. But at the same time, the way he spoke seemed so genuine, so understanding, that there was something about it that attracted me. That empty space inside me, that feeling of being incomplete, seemed to expand more and more. "You're not alone, Christian," he said, almost with a softness that disconcerted me. "I see you. I know what you need. You don't have to hide from it. I can help you find what's missing." The tone of his voice, the confidence in his words, began to make me feel something I didn't want to feel. An attraction, something that crossed the line of respect common between father-in-law and son-in-law. He was offering me something that I knew I should reject. But there was something in the way he spoke, something in his posture and in his eyes that made me want to listen more, to give in. If you like it, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. The atmosphere around us seemed to distort as the conversation took on a more intimate tone. The cafe was empty, except for the two of us, and the darkness that gripped the city made Brendan's words resonate in a different way. He leaned closer to me, his voice now lower, almost like a whisper. "I know what you're looking for, Christian, and if you let me, I can show you." My hands began to sweat, and the air, which had once felt fresh and renewing, was now heavy, dense. It was as if I was about to make an irreversible mistake, and yet a part of me didn't want to stop. I looked at him and he smiled. Not just any smile, but a smile loaded with something I didn't want to recognize. It was a smile that carried a promise that attracted me, seduced me, but at the same time made me feel completely lost. Before I could react, before any words came out of my mouth, he moved even closer and his lips touched mine with an unsettling softness. The shock was instantaneous. A shiver ran down my spine, but at the same time, there was something inevitable about the situation. It was as if the world had stopped around us, and I, at that moment, was incapable of turning back. Slowly separating us, Brendan looked into my eyes and said, almost as a challenge, "You felt that, didn't you?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I looked at him, stunned, but there were no words that could describe the whirlwind that was going on inside me. The only thing I knew was that something had changed. I was no longer the same. We went to a hotel in the city center to connect and then returned to our homes. The rest of the evening passed like a hurricane. When I got home, Amelia was in bed waiting for me, unaware of everything. She smiled when I came in, but something inside me had broken, something that might never be mended. The days following the meeting with Brendan were a blur. I didn't know if I was living in false danger or if it was real. It was a cold Friday night when Brendan called me again. The sound of the call on my cell phone snapped me out of the mental ramblings that had become the norm of my days. I knew he wanted to see me. I knew that somehow he already knew that I couldn't run away from this relationship we were building, even if I tried. Something in me had been awakened, and the weight of it was beginning to suffocate me. "Christian, I need you to come to my house. I have something important to tell you." His voice was calm, but there was an urgency in his tone. It was an urgency that drew me in, as if he knew exactly what to say to get me to come to him. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that the only way to chase away the shadows that were beginning to haunt me was to face it. When I arrived at Brendan's house, the sky was overcast, and the wind was cutting through the streets with relentless force. His house was on the edge of a quiet residential area, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to touch the sky. The house lights were on, and a light smoke came out of the chimney, creating a welcoming yet unsettling image. Everything seemed to be in tune with the tension I was carrying inside. Brendan greeted me with a penetrating gaze, but without saying a word. He gestured for me to follow him into the living room, a large rustic room with dark wood furniture and a fireplace burning in the corner. The warmth of the room contrasted with the cold outside, but it didn't bring me any comfort. I was tense, nervous, and my mind was full of conflicting images, of the life I'd left behind, of my wife, of how things could go wrong. He sat down in the leather armchair by the fireplace and indicated the chair next to it, but I didn't sit down. I remained standing, my gaze lost in the dancing flames. The crackling of the fire filled the silence, but it couldn't calm my mind. "I knew you'd come," Brendan said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Because you know you can't run away from this, Christian. I know you're struggling, but what happened between us isn't something you can just ignore. You feel it. You feel what happened. And it's not just about attraction. It's about something deeper, something you never imagined you'd need." I finally sat down on the sofa, feeling the tension grow in my chest. My heart was beating faster, and my breathing seemed heavy. "What do you want from me, Brendan?" I asked, the words coming out more desperate than I would have liked. "I've already made a mistake, and you know that too. I have a life. I have a wife who trusts me." Brendan stood up from the armchair and approached me slowly. His face was serious, but his eyes carried a mixture of compassion and something else, something I couldn't define. He stopped in front of me and put his hand on my shoulder. The touch was firm, but at the same time comforting in the wrong way. "I don't want you to feel guilty, Christian," he said with a calmness that seemed even frightening. "But you need to understand what this means. We can't ignore it. What happened between us isn't just a physical transgression. It's an opening to something much deeper. You feel it, I know you feel it." I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling of panic that overwhelmed me. What he was saying was affecting something inside me that I didn't want to face, but at the same time, he was right. I could no longer deny that there was something there, something I didn't know how to deal with, but which was consuming me more and more. I felt lost, and with every word Brendan said, that feeling of disorientation increased. I don't know what to do," I mumbled, my voice almost inaudible. "I'm so confused, Brendan. I don't know who I am anymore." He leaned closer, almost touching my forehead with his, and I realized I was at a point of no return. His every word was like a drug, addicting me more and more to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was something I needed. Something that, deep down, I could no longer resist. "You're discovering yourself, Christian," he said, the words imbued with a meaning I couldn't fully grasp. "And that's what you need. I'm the answer you've been looking for." At that moment, I knew that the life I knew, the life with Amelia, was about to change forever. The weight of the silence that had settled between us and the guilt I was beginning to feel were becoming unbearable. But at the same time, a part of me, a darker and more irresistible part, wanted to give in completely. The next few days passed like a meaningless whirlwind. The air was thicker, as if everything around me was caught in an invisible web that I couldn't escape. Amelia noticed my absence, but didn't question it. She just went about her routine, immersed in her work and the commitments that kept her busy. I tried to be the husband she expected, but every word, every gesture seemed like a lie, as if I were living two lives that were becoming more distorted every day. I didn't know what to think anymore, and the memories of Brendan's house, his touch, the words he'd said, wouldn't leave my head. Every time I closed my eyes, his face was there, like a shadow, like a memory that couldn't be erased. I felt lost, disconnected, as if I was heading towards something I didn't fully understand, but at the same time, couldn't avoid. My mind wandered back to the last conversation with Brendan. He had said that I needed to discover myself, that the answer was there between us. But what did that mean? What did he want from me? A part of me wanted to ignore everything, go back to my previous life, keep up the facade of a perfect marriage. But there was another part, a darker part, that knew that wouldn't be possible. I had already crossed the line, and the line behind me was disappearing, fading away, like a road fading into the mist. It took me 2 months to discover myself completely. What I had was prejudice against myself, but I couldn't let that affect me. And I confess today that having Brendan by my side made everything better. And today I have a more open view of what it means to be happy. Everyone finds their own happiness. We just can't get stuck in it. It's bad for us. What do you think I should do? Stop relating to my father-in-law? This was the only way for me to live happily outside of my marriage. Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.